You might have noticed a change in your neighborhood lately. Yep, Sprint stores are now T-Mobile stores. Now that Sprint is T-Mobile, you get more coverage, value, and benefits than ever before. We've invested billions to bring our 5G from big cities to small towns across America. And great coverage is just the start. From high-speed mobile hotspot data to weekly deals and giveaways, our customers get tons of great benefits. Head to your new T-Mobile store to learn more.
Qualifying service and capable device required. Coverage not available in some areas. Some uses may require certain plan or features. See T-Mobile.com.
This is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the Young Wizards series, A Wizard Alone. The remainder of Chapter 8, Entrapments, and I believe only part of Chapter 9, Reconstructions. I will give you further details in the episode itself. In this section, I'm going to be comparing the original manuscript, not even manuscript, the original published novel, with the new Millennium edition of the novel. So this should be interesting. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you so much to Jacob for commissioning this episode. And thank you also to Jacob for putting in a bunch of effort. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can share this. It looks like I might be able to. And I'm going to post the link here in the chat for this episode. I'm going to try and remember to post it in the episode show notes once it goes up on Facebook, or not on Facebook, on iTunes. If I don't remember to do that, please feel free to get in touch with me if you want the link. What Jacob did was create a 2-column document with the, it wasn't the whole section, but what he did was take the main paragraphs of sections that had been changed and put them side by side so that I could really easily compare some of the changes that had been made. And he highlighted the specific areas, the sentences that had been changed. And I just really appreciate this, Jacob. Thank you so much. Thank you also to Patricia, who is commissioned a bunch of the Young Wizards series going forward, and also sent me downloads of all of the new versions of the books. As a gift. It was really, really appreciated. And I read the new version for this one, and then I went back and checked out sections according to where Jacob pointed out changes. So, first of all, it has been a while since the last episode. I just wanted to mention and get your feedback as well, everybody, because let's see. Oh, wow. Yeah, the last episode was in May. June, July. Oh, so yeah, 3 months almost exactly. For those who are or were like fans of the series as it was coming out, I don't know how many people were, and how many people found it afterwards, and how many people found it after these edits had been made. I'm really curious what your feelings are on an author going back and changing their published work. This is the kind of thing that I feel I get a lot of conflicting opinions on. Forgive me, I'm going to move my mic here for a second because I want to move back. On the one hand, there are people who feel like the original work, whether problematic or not, should be maintained as a time capsule, right? That it's understandable to want to go back and change things that are problematic, but it's not a good policy overall. And then there are people who feel like leaving things standing as they are to continue to be consumed without commentary on the problematic aspects is perpetuating the problematic thing itself. And there's an interesting thing that's been happening with Disney. You know, a lot of Disney's content that had been made a while ago, and sometimes not even that long ago, they have been putting these sort of disclaimers at the beginning of the cartoons saying, we want to acknowledge that there are some depictions and imagery in this work that are offensive and, do not depict people fairly. We considered removing the content entirely, but felt that it was worse to pretend that this sort of content never existed. So we are keeping it here in its entirety, and basically you are going to be able to see, warts and all, what we originally made. And that, I should mention, isn't always how they handle it. Because there are some pieces of Disney content that, as I am aware, have been completely taken down off of their provider, like websites and stuff. Which I guess is interesting because that's sort of like, where do you draw the line between we're going to disclaim this or this should never be seen by human eyes again, And I think that it really depends on the media in question. If a piece of media is intended for adults, I think that should be handled differently than a media for children. If it's intended for adults, we can bring our adult understanding, our context to whatever it is we are consuming and understand this was published in 1925. They are going to be using a lot of like racial slurs and misogynistic, assumptions and all kinds of problematic language. I know this because that is, as an adult, I understand historically how things have changed. Even a child, when you're looking at something from that long ago, can often make those, like, they can understand that kind of change as well. But when you're dealing with something that is aimed at children and was published as recently as this is, I feel like it's really fair and, in my opinion, a good idea for the author to go in and make the changes that she did. There are going to be people who are impressionable reading this. There are going to be people who are on the spectrum themselves reading this. And when you are trying to understand, either if you are somebody on the spectrum, you know someone who is, have family who are, or if you are a person who has no connection to anybody on the spectrum at all, as far as you know, if you are reading something like this, it's going to have some sort of lasting effect on your psyche because you're a kid. I really think that's how it works. As children, things make a deeper impression on us. We have squashier brains, and it's like silly putty, and you press something into it and it's simply going to stay in a way that as an adult, that doesn't happen the same way. So if you are somebody on the spectrum and you're reading this and it was the original edition, it could make you really feel bad about yourself and like, I'm a problem to be fixed, which is the language that tends to be changed most often, I've noticed, in what she has done. And if you are somebody who isn't on the spectrum, if you were to read the original, you would see people who are on the spectrum as problems to be fixed, which is problematic in its own whole other way. So personally, I think that this was the responsible thing to do, and I understand why folks might sort of balk at this being done consistently through all media. I don't think it should be. I don't think it should be handled that way. And of course, there's a difference between trying to edit something visual versus a book also. As an author, you can have that same creator go in and choose better language and update it themselves. And it's simply the text itself has changed. But how do you change something that's like on film? That's going to be trickier by nature. That's a whole other conversation. So all of that to say, I was looking at the changes and I haven't finished the book yet. This is part of what Jacob wanted to do was split up this last section into two parts so that I would have some time to compare and contrast the first and second versions. So Yama is here. Hi, Yama. Yama, if you follow that link, you'll see the document that Jacob shared with me that has the original and the new version compared next to one another. So I'm going to go over the overall like storyline here and then go back and talk about the changes. So we finished the last episode. I stopped at, it looks like it says page 253 of 335. And that is part way through chapter 7. It's wild to me how these chapters are set up. So Nita and Dareen are beginning to work together on the spell for her to go in and rescue Kit. Yama says, I think I listened to the original because I thought it was extremely offensive. It's good to know she went back to it. Yeah. And I think you'll see some of the changes. It seems to demonstrate to me a greater understanding of the effect she was having. So I think that's a good thing. So Nita and Dareen are working together, and I really enjoy this moment where Dareen was still sitting in the chair by Nita's desk looking over the lifeline spell she'd constructed. At any other time, Nita would have been annoyed enough by the elegance and speed with which Dareen had constructed it to try and find at least some fault with it. I just really enjoy those little comments. Look, I don't have sisters, and I am certain that there's a kind of relationship there that I will never really understand, you know. I have a half brother. We didn't grow up together. We didn't really live together for any prolonged period. I genuinely have no idea what that kind of dynamic is like. But I have had a best friend when I was in high school who I didn't realize at the time quite how bad it was, but she saw me as a huge rival. When I say best friends, I have a huge asterisk after that. Looking back at it, I'm like, were we? And she had, like, I am certain moments like this of just being like, fucking really? Like, just that kind of energy is something that I am sure I have carried towards other people in my life as well. Just a little bit resentful at how effortless it seems to be. And I also like the fact that Nita is able to set that shit aside. She recognizes in herself this unreasonable streak. She's not proud of it. And she is able to prioritize their friend over their personal little fucking irritations with each other. The bed was surrounded by a long, tightly knitted cord of words in the speech, rather like Kit's leash for Paunch, but both more intricate and thicker. The wizardry had to handle much higher power levels than the leash did, and had no life support functions as such. Those Nita would be carrying with her on her charm bracelet in a suite of interconnected shielding and atmosphere maintenance spells. This is so wild. I know that I have said before how much I admire the way that Diane Duane talks about magic and how she depicts magic. And every single time that I get into these books, I realize, like, I appreciate it. And yet I still don't really appreciate it enough. I don't, she has done something with the way that she phrases everything that I find really unique. And it may simply be that I haven't consumed enough fantasy media to know that this is a common thing. That could well be it. Despite what I do for a living, I am not as well read as a lot of people. You would think I would be, but no. And so I am willing to admit that there may be some conventions and the sorts of methods of showing a magical system that are actually extremely common, and I'm just personally not familiar with them. But the way that she has this magic so connected to language that it is a visual depiction of words in front of you. And at one point, Nita is making her like little thing that's glowing. She makes it float so that it'll cast light on something that she's working on. And it's described as like weaves together some words to wrap around it so that it will hover. Like, I just love that energy, that whole idea, especially considering that she's a writer. Her giving reverence to language and words in this way feels extra significant to me. And I just really appreciate it. There's something about it that feels like I understand when a magical system is supposed to be about more than the written word. I could see some people feeling is very limited. Obviously, the speech is a whole different animal to like our written language, but nevertheless, a lot of people, for example, Dresden Files treats magic as a type of physics. And if you create fire from somewhere, then you create extreme cold because you pulled that heat out of something. And, if you decide to create cold, you're going to make another area warm because you pulled all the cold. That kind of like shifting, everything has to come from somewhere. And he uses a force of wind and it causes a vacuum below him kind of thing. And that I completely understand because it is understandable that physics would seem to be related to magic. It's a type, like chemistry and physics have seemed practically like magic for most of human existence since we don't really understand a lot of things. And I mean, really to the average layperson, even the technology we use every day is practically magical. I don't know how this shit works at all. Like, I don't even know the beginnings of how it works. I genuinely could not answer the most basic questions. But, there's something about that feeling very physical in a way that is like, oh, it's all about instinct. It's about your feelings. It's about the connection to the universe and creation in a way that is very emotional. And there's a sort of almost sensuality to that. And so to have a magic that is so logical and focus so much on words, it just feels really different to me. And it's really interesting to see the way that she still makes it about the connection to the universe, about the unity of everything. Like that is not, the language is not at the expense of the wonder of it at all. But it feels so much more practical in a lot of ways because of the way she describes it, that looking back, the fact that Dareen's manual turns out to be like a computer, that actually shouldn't be as much of a surprise as it was when I first was reading that, So I don't know. I just really, every time I come across this, I am so impressed with it, And I'm just, for those of you who are listening, if you hear me on my phone here, I am going to be using the version of the book that's on my phone because it isn't connecting with my Kindle on my computer. So, yeah, I am just like flicking through here. It's just a lot. It's much weirder for me to be on my phone while I'm recording than I thought it would be. So I'm noticing it and assuming you're noticing it too, but you probably aren't. So she lays down. She's told by Dareen she's got 6 hours and that it will pull her out no matter what she's in the middle of doing. So she has to keep an eye on her time. And I completely forgot how differently time flows when she's like inside Daryl's consciousness. It's a very different situation. So she's in the middle of some shit later that it feels to us as readers that it's been like 10 minutes. And then she gets pulled out in the middle of it and it has been 6 hours. So yeah, that shit was, there's something about that makes Kit's situation being trapped in there feels so much more nightmarish to me. Seeing how somebody who is very aware that time is passing differently and should be keeping an eye on it, they still lost track utterly and wound up being surprised at the passage of time And poor Kit, like, let's say that he was eventually able to find his way out of there again. How long would have passed before he did it? I don't think he would have by himself. So she gets into Daryl's consciousness. She found herself standing in the dark. That darkness was nearly complete. There were no spotlights now, no signs of anything being in this universe but her, and only the faintest, not quite black background radiance from the sky above. And I like that. That's the kind of thing that if you've ever stood in an utterly dark room on an utterly dark night, you can still sort of see where the window is because the dark outside is different from the dark inside. And she is using this Rowan wand. It says, lent to her by Liused, the tree in her backyard. This one was getting close to its used-by date. Such wands routinely lasted for only 3 full moons and an intercalary day. I don't know what that means. Let me look that up. Intercalary, of a day, adjective of a day or month inserted in the calendar to harmonize it with the solar year. The nature of an insertion, or in botany, located between its daughter cells, especially in a grass at or near the base of a leaf. So that could mean any of those things because it's a tree. It's tree time. I genuinely don't know what this means. Anybody who has insight on that, feel free to let me know. So it wasn't much good for anything but light at this point, but light was all Nita needed. As she touched it and pulled it out, the wand came afire with a blaze of second-hand moonlight, enough to show Nita that she was standing on the same black surface that she'd seen here before when meeting the clown, the robot, and the knight. But there was nothing else to be seen at all in any direction. So she heads on out, and this eventually she first uses this sort of spell to sense where Kit is, and it's described as the kind of like green round radar screen that traffic controllers use, where it's like doing the whoop whoop sweep around her to try and find Kit. And she manages to lock on him, but it's like really faint. He's far away, but he's here. She knows that she's in the right place. It's just not going to be as easy and quick to find him as she was sort of hoping it would be. The trouble was that he seemed to be all by himself. There didn't seem to be any indication of Daryl on the radar screen. He might still be by himself, Nita thought, or if he has found Daryl, then Daryl might have himself cloaked somehow. Either way, at least now, Nita had a direction to walk in. So, this is when she checks her time and realizes she has barely accomplished anything here, and it has already been 3 hours. Half her time is gone. And she's just like, oh, God, this is really bad. It startles her a lot. And she sees this line on the horizon, and she's heading toward it. It's, she has to. That's the direction that Kit is in. And when she gets there, it's this white wall. And it is meant to stop an intruder. And as we hear later, when Daryl is talking to Paunch, he has the shit sealed up. That is what this is for. And she can tell that anything she tries to do, the wall is going to adapt to stop her. If she tries to levitate over it, it's just going to continue to rise and meet her. If she tries to dig under it, it will extend downward and block her efforts from, going underneath. So she tries a spell. And this moment, she taps into this like lasso that she's got going on with Doreen to get some power. And Nita let the power flow, squeezing it down to compact it a couple of times and make room for more. Finally, after about a minute, she cut off the flow and stepped toward the wall, using pressure of hands and mind and a few sentences in the speech to shape that power into a small, concentrated, explosive charge of wizardry. She pushed it up against the bottom of the wall like so much plastic explosive, instructing it to vent all its force away from her, and then retreated to a safe distance. Nita spoke the air in front of her, and then the explosives actuator word in the speech. The result was a dazzling flash and impact like lightning striking 6 feet away. It doesn't do anything. She's disgusted. This is one of those things, if you've ever played a video game and you aren't aware the level of the boss you're about to fight and you have a weapon that you're fucking confident on and you try that and it doesn't do shit, I imagine it's that same kind of vibe, especially if it's a weapon that it like took effort for you to charge up or effort to find, and then you're like so hype and it fucking doesn't work. That's always infuriating. And it makes total sense that it doesn't work. It shouldn't work. The lone power is being kept out. As we find out, he's really being kept in. If the lone power is the one we're up against, she better not be able to break that wall, because that shit isn't going to stand up against a power like that for any amount of time then. And even like Daryl acknowledges the lone power is going to get out eventually. But there's a sense of Daryl being like, he'll stay in here as long as I'm alive. That's what I'm doing, is holding him here. And at least for the next 60 years or however long I stay alive, I will have him. Which, yikes. You know, this is part of what Nita is thinking about later and is like, no wonder they're considered saints. He's basically sacrificing himself entirely in order to hold this being in place. And that is a hell of a sacrifice. But she, in her, like on her end, doesn't really feel like it's worth it. And I can't help but be judgy about that, because it's not her place to decide if it's worth it. I understand her wanting to save Kit. And I don't disagree that Kit being drawn into this was not part of his, like, he didn't agree to it. He agreed to undertake this mission, but he did not agree to being a sacrifice. So on that front, sure, save Kit, I'm behind you. But then when we start to get into saving Daryl, if Daryl's function in the universe is meant to be that he sacrifices himself, then what right do you have to undo that? You know, it just, I felt like you can't take his agency completely away, but there's no solution that doesn't do that to somebody. And that's what sucks here. So at this moment, she pulls out this other thing that, let's see, the accelerator wizardry sprang into being in her hands, a long, narrow, conical shape with a blunt stalk. Nita snugged the stock of it up against her shoulder and carefully took aim at the base of the wall. She had invested a great deal of energy into this wizardry. Now she would see what it was worth. And I couldn't help but be like, girl, this isn't going to work, and you shouldn't want it to work. This isn't going to work. But thankfully, she gets pulled out before she can try again. Of course, it's not really thankfully, because she thought she had so much more time, she completely lost track. And so she's still aiming the gun and like about to fire when she materializes back in her bed. And Doreen has to be like, holy shit, don't pull the trigger, oh my god. Blow the fucking roof of the house off, you know? And she's like, what the fuck am I doing here? And Doreen's like, bitch, what the fuck are you doing not looking at your goddamn watch that I told you to keep an eye on the whole time? How about that? Your time is up. I warned you. And Nita is like, all right, well, let's get this shit going and we're going back in. And Doreen has to be like, I've been sitting here sustaining this spell for 6 hours. No, I can't just do that again. I have school tomorrow. I promised Dad that I would keep going back. You have school tomorrow. It's 3 a.m. We cannot try this again tonight. I'm sorry, we can't. And Anita is ready to fucking crack. She's so irritated by this delay. And I don't blame her. She has to just leave Kit And she has no idea what's happening to him. You know, I mean, it's no wonder to me that the next day she is just in a state. So she can't sleep. The next morning, she gets a call from his parents that are like, have you found out what's going on with him? And she doesn't have anything to tell them. It's awful. I really felt for them because they're just sitting there waiting on this other child to like rescue their son. They have no power in this situation at all. I feel so bad for them. So then we go back into Kit's POV. So I'm going to go to the document now. Thank you again, Jacob. And I'm going to describe the different changes. So this starts off chapter 9. The mirrors went on forever. Kit and Paunch stood together in a brittle glory of reflected light. Overhead was a bright gray sky, featureless. All around them mirrors stood, as many mirrors as trees in a forest, set at 1,000 different angles. And this says mirrors that bent one's reflection awry, tall ones, small ones, mirrors that reflected clearly, shadowy mirrors, dazzling ones, mirrors, reflecting mirrors, until the mind that looked at them began to flinch and sicken, hunting something that wasn't just another reflection of itself. Kit and Paunch wandered among them, searching for something, but Kit had forgotten what it was they were looking for, along with everything else. And then we come to the changes. So, splinters of conversation and fragments of personality hid in the reflections and fled from mirror to mirror. Kit and Paunch moved slowly among them, looking in some, avoiding others. Some had too many eyes to look in comfortably. And the new version says some had too many eyes in them to look into comfortably, to just sort of clarify that. And then the original, not all the eyes seemed human. It was as if alien logics looked out of them, either irrational or briefly revealing rationalities that were more painful than the human kind. And these were the glances that made Kit and Paunch shy away most hurriedly, looking for somewhere to hide. The new version says, in others, the gazes looking outward were fringed with alien-seeming thought, as if with distortion rainbows, irrational and unnerving, impossible to figure out. From these mirrors, Kit and Paunch increasingly shied away, sometimes upset enough to want to find somewhere to hide. So I found those changes to be pretty interesting, actually. The difference between simply saying they looked for somewhere to hide and making them upset enough to want to find somewhere to hide. I feel like that's a very subtle change that actually is very effective. When they're looking for something to hide, as a reader, you kind of feel like there's genuinely a physical threat here, but when it's described as making them upset enough to look for somewhere to hide, then you understand a little bit better that their reaction is of a totally different nature than like physical hiding could actually help with. It's just an instinctual sort of response that they are having, which I feel it makes it a lot clearer. And if I had just read the original one, I don't think I would have understood quite as well. And also, it was as if alien logics looked out either irrational or briefly revealing rationalities that were more painful than the human kind. I honestly don't even know what that was supposed to mean. That feels so confusing and convoluted to me. The new gazes looking outward were fringed with alien-seeming thought, as if with distortion rainbows, irrational and unnerving, impossible to figure out. That's still really abstract, but way clearer. That makes a lot more sense. So in those cases, I just feel like that's a clarity of language that she's going for here. And I have to wonder, even aside from the whole problematic language and thought processes argument, how many authors like reread their old work and they're like, oh, there was such a better way to say that. Why did I choose that wording? That is the clunkiest shit. You know, I'm sure that going back and rewriting parts of stuff is every writer's fantasy, and they just actually are not allowed to do it. But she got a green light for it here, you know? I wonder if she just took advantage of it a little bit just for the sake of punching up some of the writing outside of, you know, the type of language she was using. So then we have them walking around for a while, and eventually Kit feeling exhausted and laying against one of the trees, sitting down and like leaning against it. And the original said, it was a relief just to sit here, his eyes closed so that he didn't have to see eyes in the mirrors, his body rocking a little and letting the motion distract him from the myriad other distractions around that were fraying the fabric of his mind. Not a great sentence. Convoluted, repeats the word distraction or distract too many times. The new version. It was a relief to just sit here, his eyes closed so that he didn't have to see the eyes in the mirrors. Period. Full stop. He rocked his body a little so that the motion would shift his attention away from the myriad other distractions around him that were fraying the fabric of his mind. And that is like, just to me, again, gives agency to him. It's in the original, it's just that his body begins rocking sort of without him, and it provides a distraction, but it doesn't feel like that's the purpose of it. And in the new version, Kit is choosing rocking as a coping mechanism. That is something that he is engaging with actively. It is not his body functioning without his understanding or knowledge. He is choosing to do that because it helps him in some way. And that's a very different energy, you know? So then we go to a little further on. Finally, someone came. Kit didn't open his eyes. The original says, every time he did, he saw other eyes staring at him, and he couldn't bear the invasiveness of their gaze. But he heard the footsteps even through the rush of noise. The new version. Finally, someone came. Kit didn't dare open his eyes, afraid to see the awful blank sheen of the mirrors again, as bad when something showed in them as when nothing did. But he heard the footsteps even through the rush of noise, and heard when they stopped close to him and Paunch. So again, that feels like just a clarity of language for the sake of it, and the fact that it's not just eyes staring, it's sometimes the fact that there is nothing being as like upsetting, that it isn't simply other people, like explicitly always, that are the issue. And sometimes it's just the disconnection or the sense of like not knowing what, you know what I mean? And also the fact that it's just specified that the steps stop near him and Paunch, because otherwise it doesn't really like get specific. It just says he heard the footsteps and then whatever it was stood there is the next sentence. So it doesn't make it clear that it just like came to a stop next to them. So the original reads, whoever it was stood there, not looking at them straight on. That much Kit could feel on his skin, even without looking. I asked you not to come, it said. New version. Kit could feel the onlooker's regard right through his skin, like the heat of sunlight, not that there were any sun here. I did ask you not to come, said the one standing there. And again, subtle changes. Whoever it was stood there not looking at them straight on. But the new one, could feel the onlooker's regard right through his skin. So, my question on this one, is it meant to be that the onlooker's regard is different than looking at him straight on? Or is the regard meant to be that he is actually looking straight at them? And did she change Daryl's action here? Is really what the question is for me. Because that I am not entirely like, is it supposed to be that Daryl, when he is inside of his own consciousness, has no problem looking straight at Kit? Or is this meant to be that somebody doesn't have to be looking at you for it to be upsetting. You can sense that they are regarding you, whether they're looking straight at you or not. And that is what feels invasive. You know, I'm not entirely sure what the change is meant to signify there. And then what Daryl says, I filled this whole place with one version of what happened to me. This is from the original. Said whoever was speaking. The other followed me right in here, the way it always does. And now what happened to me has happened to it. There was a kind of sorrowful amusement about the speaker's voice. I did a really good job this time. I don't know how long it'll be stuck in here, but no one can get out from inside. It's sealed. New version. The onlooker sighed. I've filled this whole place with a really nasty version of what I've been going through the past few months. So it's specified. One said, one version of what happened to me. The other says, a really nasty version of what I've been going through the last few months. So instead of it being a static thing, what happened to me sounding like he's just talking about having autism in general, the new version is specifying the particularly difficult period he was going through recently, which I have to imagine is due to a better understanding of the sorts of like ebbs and flows of functionality that people with severe autism experience. And then now what the other followed me in here the way it always does, and now what happened to me has happened to it. Instead it says, sure enough, it followed me in. There was a sorrowful amusement about the speaker's voice. I'm telling you, though, I did a really good job this time. The outside's sealed. No one else can get in. And then, added to the new version, none of its little minions can smuggle in energy. And no one can get out from inside either. The barrier's sealed. It should stay stuck in here with us four. He sounded grimly satisfied. A real long time. Could be forever. So, none of its little minions can smuggle it energy. Is that what, like, was supposed to be happening with, like, some of the creatures that we saw in the other versions of his consciousness? That those were, like, the like, I don't think that I knew about the Lone One's minions. Is that a new development? I'm just asking questions. I'm just saying. So then the original is Paunch saying, we have to stay here forever then. And he says, I don't know about you. You guys, your eyes aren't anything like his or the others. You're something different. But me and him and the other, yes, we'll have to stay here forever. In the new version, I don't know about you, the voice said. You're something different. But me and your friend and the dark other, yes, we might have to get this job done, because I promised, and the promise is wound into the walls and the ground and the sky. Very, very different. It's giving much more of a reasoning to the way that this is set up, and a seriousness to his devotion to keeping the Lone One trapped in a way that I feel is like reminiscent of the speech and how lying will cause you to lose your wizardry, or just breaking your word, in general. So it's sort of bringing us back to that, because in the original, I feel like it seems too thin. And so adding this gives it more weight, And then, of course, we have this fucking painful moment. Well, if he has to stay forever, Paunch said, then I'm not leaving. And he lay down beside Kit, huddling close to him, and started to wait for forever. Rude. That's just really not a nice thing to do to a reader. So, I hope you can live with yourself, Giant Dwayne. Thanks. All right, so going back to, got to pick up my phone again to get back into the book. That is the end of that section there. And then we go back to Nita, who is going to school, trying to have a normal day. She goes to see her counselor, and it doesn't go well at all. This was interesting to me. He tries initially because she just says, I really don't feel like talking to you this morning. I wish I could make up some dumb story and tell you that instead. Mr. Millman shrugged and sat back in his chair with his arms behind his head. Everyone else does. Why shouldn't you? Entirely against her will, Nita had to smile at that. Just so you don't expect me to come up with something original. And he basically is like, you're a human being and there's very little that's original about any of our experiences, as much as we want to tell ourselves that they are. That's not really true. And it seems like she's starting to feel a little bit better about everything, like just generally in the conversation, until finally there's this moment where he asks her to do a card trick again. And this is like the moment where she just kind of snaps a little bit. In the face of the more important things that were presently on her mind, the question seemed so annoying that Nita nearly hollered at him, "Don't you think I have better things to do than card tricks?" But she caught herself. She manages to do a decent one, but she uses a wizardry to pull it off that she had promised she wouldn't use. And I don't know if that's going to wind up being considered lying and bounce back on her, but I really hope that isn't what she does. Like, that isn't the consequence of this. And Mr. Millman isn't focused on the card trick really at all. He just says that her anger was very obvious and very accessible. We were talking about the stages of grieving, how they don't always run in sequence. Let me just suggest that when anger runs so close to the surface that it's easily provoked by unusual circumstances, you're quite probably not done with it yet. It's not a good thing, not a bad thing, just what's so. But you might want to think about what result this kind of emotion has produced in the past, or might produce again in the future. And this is what leads Nita to realizing that her anger in the past has motivated her magic. And that while she wasn't able to save her mother's life, she was able to do some amazing things, prolong her life by a couple of months, and as she puts it, gone from world to world and universe to universe, learning to hunt down and manipulate the kernels that controlled those universes' versions of natural law. And now she had to admit that it had been her grief and anger at what was happening to her mother that had made her as effective as she had become. The thought unnerved her. Nita wasn't used to thinking of anger as a tool. It had always seemed like something you didn't want to get accustomed to using, in case it started to become a habit, or started twisting you and your wizardry in directions you didn't want to go. But if you're careful, she thought, if you stay in control, if you manage it carefully enough, maybe it's okay to use it every now and then. Maybe managing it rather than letting it manage you is the whole idea. I really appreciate this because I feel like anger is portrayed by practically everybody as a negative thing. Having too much anger and rage makes you irrational, makes you violent, makes you basically volatile in a way that is unpredictable and dangerous. And while that can be true, anger is also the product of injustice and drives people looking for justice. Anger is also a reaction to wanting better for yourself, for your friends, for the world. Anger isn't a bad thing. Anger is an emotion, which is a neutral, it's what you do with it, exactly as she is saying. And I just get really irritated at how often it is portrayed as something that needs to be overcome. It's not like learn to cope with your anger in a way that gives it direction. It's learn to be at peace and forgive so that you don't feel anger anymore is often the message. And I get really bored of that. Telling yourself to not feel an emotion isn't a healthy way to live. you shouldn't try to occupy that space because it's a losing battle. You're going to feel things, and you should. And to just try and go through life attempting to not feel anger, that's just not going to get you where you think you are going. Just straight up adjust your expectations. So I really appreciated this because anger is what has made the world improve. I really believe that. And sure, people have acted out of rage and done things that are awful, but people have acted out of a lot of different emotions and done things that are awful. And it seems to be anger that always gets the sort of like blame for everything. And I think it's just that we don't have a healthy relationship with it and we don't understand it. And oftentimes the people who are on the receiving end of that anger don't feel like it's justified because, of course, you wouldn't when somebody's angry at you a lot of the time. Sometimes we're like, yeah, no, I get it. I deserve this. But most of the time we're defensive. We think we had a good reason for whatever. And we don't like it or appreciate it. And so we try to assign that emotion, negativity, that maybe we are the ones who deserve that to be redirected back at us, And I don't know. This was like something that I found very effective. And basically this like gets Nita thinking, and she winds up cutting school early in order to get the fuck out and use this, and realizes that she has to go after the colonel of Daryl's world in order to get through that barrier. And what's so fun about this is that she keeps on running into one frustration after another in her attempts to like teleport home and get into the house and yada, yada, yada. And her anger keeps like mounting due to these little setbacks. And she's sort of amused because she notices that happening and decides to like fold her anger at this stuff into her anger at everything else in order to keep the fuel going here. So yeah, at one point, like she goes to the bathroom in order to find a like place to teleport from. And she's like annoyed at how long it takes people to leave. And then a teacher comes in to do like a bathroom check, and she gets annoyed at the teacher, but finally she transports herself home. And I love this. Nita came out in a sheltered part of her backyard, ankle deep in snow, and the air pressure change caused by the air she had brought with her from school made snow fall off the trees above her and onto her head. She spluttered as the snow got down her collar, not finding it funny, and getting angrier by the second. Nita's house keys were inside her locker at school, along with her coat and boots. All of this stuff, just like the irritation of it. And eventually she just uses that displacement spell to go right through the door into the house. And she just plops down and uses her energy. And she's thinking as she's doing this about Kit and the situation that she has been in. And I found this really interesting. She's thinking about how Doreen told her, now you know how Kit felt before when you wouldn't listen to him. Kit had come right out and said that he wished he had backup on this job. She'd ignored him, and he'd gone ahead with what he was doing and got himself in too deep. I should have been paying attention to what was going on around me, no matter how awful I felt. I've been indulging myself. I've almost been having fun hurting. That's so stupid. Nita stopped herself. There was no point in rerunning the guilt movies. They always ended the same way, and a new guilt movie was no better than the old ones. If that isn't a fucking sermon. There was no point in rerunning the guilt movies. They always ended the same way. Damn, that is some good shit. And I will say, too, that bit, like, I've been indulging myself. I've almost been having fun hurting. I don't know that that's necessarily fair. Only she can tell that. If she says so, then okay. And I do understand what she means. I was rereading some Jane Austen recently. And in Sense and Sensibility, her little sister is very emotional and sort of has these like reactions to things that are based more on what she thinks should be than what she's actually feeling. So essentially, she gets like dumped by this dude, and he just disappears on her, totally ghosts her. And it's described as like she went to bed, but of course did not sleep. It would have been unacceptable to be able to have a full night's sleep before, after being left as she had been. The only acceptable outcome was to rise from the bed looking more wearied than when she had lain down in it. You know, and that feels like kind of what Nita is saying here. Just the whole energy of like, I am suffering and people must know it, and I must be hyper aware of it at all times because I owe that to my mother somehow. Like, her memory demands that I be appropriately torn up over this. And also just the respect of her friend who was asking for help. It's really easy to feel like everybody should wait until I'm done with my grieving. And, you know, people do need to make space for grief when a friend is going through that. But life continues on outside of your little microcosm. And if you just disappear on everybody because of what you're going through personally, and then come out of it and expect things to be the way they were, that's not really going to be how it goes. You know, folks are going to realize that sometimes people are going to make so much space for you to be grieving that when you try and return to the space you had been, that's gone. And you've been put somewhere else in their sort of like social mindscape, if that makes sense. Anyway, so she goes into this spell and finds the kernel of his universe. It took less time to find than she'd hoped. Nita had been banking on the idea that Daryl's grasp of the world building was instinctive, not studied. When she finally sensed what he was looking for, she took the time to actually walk to it, not wanting to attract any possible unwanted attention by using a transit spell. So she goes to it and then is able to step through the barrier using this kernel and finds the mirror forest, essentially. And this is when we have another like comparison bit of what was original and what is in the present version. She hears dialogue, and it's Daryl's parents talking. The original, so there's only one line has been changed. So up till a point that I will mention, all of this is the same on both. Get tired of waiting sometimes, you know, said one of them, a man's voice, Nita thought. Sometimes I wonder whether any of it matters at all. Of course it matters, said another voice, a softer one, sadder but more certain of itself. We have to keep doing what we're doing. Someday. And in the new one, it says we have to keep doing what we're doing, being there for him. Someday. And then it trails off. So she gets more specific about what it is that they are doing for him. Then, the voices got more distinct as Nita got closer to the forest. Someday, but no one can tell us when that day is going to be. No one has the slightest idea, and we're the ones who know him best. We're the ones who ought to be able to tell. For a while there, and here comes the original, it looked like it was working a little. But since autumn, it's like we've hit a brick wall or something. No change. I can't help but think that maybe there's not going to be any more change, that this is as good as it's ever going to get, that he's going to be this way forever. New version. For a good while there, things seemed to be going so well. But then, come autumn, a pained gulp for air, it all went to pieces. No matter what they keep telling us about burnout, that it may get better, that he may find a way to cope again, I can't help but think they have no idea that maybe this is the way he's going to be from now on, that this is as good as things are ever going to get. And then in the original, the reply is, you know, they told us this was likely to happen, that there's plateaus, times when nothing seems to happen for a long time. New version, you know, they told us this might happen, that there's a very good chance he'll find a new coping level as he gets older, but that things could look very bad for a while. And every case is different, you know that too. The new version, this long if necessary. There's no way to tell how much time he needs. His situation's unique like everyone else's. So here's an interesting note from Jacob, which I really appreciate because I didn't have this context at all. Jacob says, Daryl's father originally said it looked like it was working a little. He could be referring to any supposed cure, but it makes me think of applied behavioral analysis. Doctors still often advise parents of autistic kids to get them into ABA, despite the controversy around it. The Autistic Self-Advocacy Network says that ABA uses rewards and punishments to train autistic people to act non-autistic. The ABA and other therapies with the same goals can hurt autistic people, and they don't teach us the skills we actually need to navigate the world with our disabilities. So that's really interesting. And the idea of ABA just trying to teach you to not act autistic, that rings true. That's the thing with fucking neurotypicals, is it's never about adapting ourselves to people who don't see the world the way that we do. It's always trying to make everybody else act more neurotypical, which doesn't work and doesn't help. And it just makes them feel much more like othered. And it ingrains that we and the way we function are the right way to be, and that they should be more like us. And if we're neurotypical and allegedly operating from a more stable place, shouldn't we be the more adaptable ones, the ones more capable of empathy and reaching out? Like, one would think that should fall on those who are privileged in that way, rather than all the work falling on the people who are already struggling to exist in a world that wasn't built with them in mind. So it's just a really frustrating, like, this is just the kind of thing that I understand that the attempt to try and make people act not autistic probably stemmed from a place of trying to help. But when you step back and look at that whole operation procedure, it's just so fraught and oh, what a nightmare. Human beings just really want things to all be the way we expect, rather than just trying to honor the differences we all have and figure out a way to change our landscape to fit that instead, So yeah, this whole thing is just, that really makes a lot of sense. And then, there's a point later on where Nina is looking in one of the mirrors and she doesn't see her own reflection, and is thinking about how the mirror, it looks like a vampiric mirror, because vampires are not meant to see their reflection. And it says, Daryl had done a fantastic job constructing this trap. In the original, it says, even the lone one, once inside this universe that so perfectly mirrored Daryl's autism, was vulnerable to it. New version. Even the lone one, now confined in this constructed world, was vulnerable to it, slowly losing moment after moment of its vast existence into the mirrored waste, being worn down by the forces that had been wearing away at Daryl since his ordeal began. And I think that's a much better way to put it. First of all, as an author, you constructed this universe that you want to depict his autism. And then in your own text, you're like, this place that so perfectly was like his autism. And I'm kind of like, that's, first of all, you patting yourself on the back a little bit. Not sure you deserve that. Secondly, is it? That just doesn't, how do you know? That's one of those things that it's just you just talking out of your ass because that feels like what you want the story to be. That doesn't tell us anything. And it's only the depiction of one person's experience of being on the spectrum in a way that many other people are not. So the change to he constructed a world where the lone one had to endure the kinds of wearing down that he was enduring, that is much more abstract and feels a lot more specific at the same time, if that makes sense. So, yeah, and also in the previous one that I had read, the comparison, talking about coping mechanism versus getting better, stopping acting like this. And the mention of burnout, I think, is very specific. And I would like a little bit more insight on that, Jacob, if you have time. I'm over time. I'm so annoyed because there are some things that happen later. She winds up coming up against Daryl at one point, or Daryl's manual, really, as it turns out he is, and discusses with it the pros and cons of kind of collapsing this construct. And like I said, there isn't just all like a good solution for everyone here. It's either she's kind of violating Daryl's autonomy, or she's leaving Kit trapped here. Neither of these is very good. And also I should mention that she is noticing a sort of energy around Paunch and is not entirely sure what this is. She remembers Kit's mom mentioning wizardry leakage, but she doesn't feel like that's exactly what's happening with Paunch. And she sees the lone one walking around, and I really enjoy the description of him looking like a businessman lost in a strange city and doomed to wander around because he was too proud to ask for directions. That is kind of a funny image. I don't know why that got me, but it really did. It's just, you know exactly what that means. And the fact that he is at one point gets distracted by his own reflection and doesn't notice Kit due to that, that feels right. I just really enjoyed that detail as well. And let's see. Yeah, here it is. It's like that fairy tale about the guy who does some magic creature a good turn, and as a reward it gives him a bag that nothing can get out of. The guy lives a bad life, and when the devil comes for him, he tricks it into the bag, and it's stuck there until he lets it out. But in this case, Daryl was in the bag too, and apparently thought this is a reasonable price to pay to keep part of the loan power out of circulation for days or weeks or even years at a time. Carl had been completely right. If that's not a saint, Nita thought, I don't know what is. I need to get them out of here, she said to the silence. You will have to break this paradigm, the silence said. Break the mirrors, that will release them, but it will also release the lone power back into its full potency. And this is when she's just like, the price of leaving Kit here is too high. Especially, Nita thought, putting aside her personal concerns for the moment, in Daryl's case. And I'm like, again, I don't know that you get to make that decision. Putting aside your personal concerns is actually kind of not what you want to do here, but I understand the impulse and why she feels this way. And also she thinks about how keeping the lone one in stasis keeps it from being able to change. And that's not what we want really either. We want evolution, and that can't happen if it's trapped, which is kind of beautiful in its way, you know? So this is when she uses that fucking Linak weapon again, and she shoots at a particular mirror, and it shatters, and all of the other mirrors shatter as well. And the part where I stopped is... let's see, the last sentence of the section where I stopped is, moments later there was nothing remaining inside that whole space but 5 figures standing on a dark floor and looking around in various degrees of surprise. That was where Jacob asked me to stop. So that is where we're at. So I have another episode coming up on Tuesday of next week, and that will be the last one for Wizard Alone, and then we're moving on to Wizard's Holiday that Friday. A lot of episodes back to back, so I'm excited about that, being able to read these a little bit more consistently. Thank you again so much to Jacob for putting in all that effort on getting me the different versions. I really appreciate it, and it's been very helpful. Jacob has also assembled that information for next episode as well for the last chapter, so stay tuned and find out all about it. And thank you, Yama, for coming and hanging out with me. I appreciate it. We will see you next week. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.
Cox can help make your home smarter and your life easier. Now you can use your Contour voice remote to connect to your home life cameras so you can view them right on your TV screen using simple voice commands. That makes it easy to keep tabs on what's happening around your home right from your couch. Need to keep an eye on the kids when they're playing outside? Just say, "Show me my backyard camera" into your Cox voice remote and watch them while you're in the house. And if you're waiting for a delivery and want to make sure it's there on time, no problem. Just say, "Show me driveway camera" to check on it with your Home Life HD cameras on the TV screen while you go about your day. When you live in a home powered by Cox Internet, you can stay connected to what matters and let Cox take care of the rest. To learn more about all the benefits of your connected home, visit cox.com/thisishome today.
Introducing Peacock, the new free streaming service from NBC Universal. It's hit movies, current shows, live sports, trending bits, and timeless hits. And that's why you can't not watch. Peacock. Watch for free. Upgrade for more. Stream now at peacocktv.com. Law & Order SVU streaming now.